Okay, I would just like to welcome you all. My name is Yuri Kobakis. I represent the European Commission in Luxembourg, and I want to welcome you to the Forum Gesteknöpfchen this afternoon. Thank you, all your students, for being so numerous here this afternoon, and thank you to the teachers for supporting this. And I want to say thank you to the Ministry of Education that has helped us organize this event this afternoon. We want to discuss values with you, EU values, human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These values we all have in common in our member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between men and women prevail. This is the Europe we live in. We are, I think, very lucky to live in this European Union. The words that I just mentioned are not just simply words, they are inscribed in the treaties, Article 2 of our treaty. But of course, in reality, things are not always as perfect as we would like them to be. I don't know if you know, but in Luxembourg, for example, anti-Semitic incidents from last year to the year before actually doubled between 2017 and 2018. Very often in the form of written hate speech. So what we see is verbal violence, harassment, we see Nazi symbols, we have anti-Semitic words and caricatures or videos that are being posted on the internet. I don't want to bombard you with numbers. Another number I want to mention to you is that 69% of respondents to a survey by the Fundamental Rights Agency said that respondents of African descent felt racially discriminated against in the 5 years before the survey. This is the situation in Luxembourg. This is rather scary, and this is what we want to discuss with you, because these horrifying figures about, be it anti-Semitic incidents or people feeling discriminated against, we have what is recorded officially, but then we have also what is actually happening in the everyday life. Many things are not reported, so the figures that we have are just the tip of the iceberg. To discuss this with you, I am really very delighted to have the director of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency with us this afternoon. Michael O'Flaherty is with us. The Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union is based in Vienna, was established in 2007 as an EU agency, with the specific task of providing independent, evidence-based advice on fundamental rights. Joining him on the stage is Jean-Paul Lehners, President of the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance Committee of the Council of Europe. To understand the present, to understand the future, one has to also look back to the past. One has to understand the past, and I would like to thank very much Gerd Klestadt, he is a Holocaust survivor, and he will be also sharing with you a témoignage of his experience and what is relevant about that in our world today. Perhaps some of you are old enough to be voting in the European elections that are coming up on the 26th of May. Maybe most of you will only be voting in 5 years, but I think with the rise of populism and nationalism across Europe, as in other parts of the world, with the rise of misinformation or disinformation and fake news, also with the rise of different forms of communication such as social media, which I'm sure all of you are very active on, we must be very careful that we don't deny, that we do not trivialize, that we do not banalize, and that we do not negate when we see that the values that we believe in, that I think we are brought up with also here in Europe, when these values are not respected. I think we all have a responsibility, whether it's politicians, whether it's students, whether it's at home, whether it's in school, we all have a responsibility. Maybe some of you have already experienced some form of discrimination. I hope not. But I do hope that you will participate in this discussion this afternoon with our guests. I invite you to speak up. I invite you to share with us, not only perhaps you will have questions, but you will have something to say about the issues that we want to address. And I want to say thank you also to our moderator this afternoon, Anne Simon, who will take over to make this discussion between all of you and our guests this afternoon as interactive as possible. And we don't have much time, so I pass the floor immediately to Mr. Gerd Klestadt. I ask you to please come up here and address our fantastic young audience today. Thank you.
Can you all hear me at the back? Kunt u mich al heren door handen? Merci. Moyen. Bonjour. Bon dia. Good morning, good afternoon. Ou simplement, hello. C'est un grand honneur pour moi de pouvoir m'adresser à vous et je remercie l'initiative de M. Michael O'Flaherty, ici à ma gauche, et ses collaborateurs. Je suis ici parce que je voudrais vous implorer de ne pas être influencé par les gens qui veulent faire mal aux gens, aux autres personnes qui ne sont pas comme eux. Nous sommes tous égaux, mais tous différents. Le monde doit arrêter de faire des Juifs des boucs émissaires, comme ils sont faits depuis plus que 2000 ans. Moi, je m'appelle Gerd Klestadt, je suis un Juif. Je suis non religieux, mais profondément croyant. Je suis aussi un survivant de 26 mois d'emprisonnement dans 2 camps de concentration, c'est-à-dire Westerbork aux Pays-Bas et Bergen-Belsen en Allemagne. Le dernier était le camp infâme de Bergen-Belsen où étaient également les 2 sœurs Margot et Anne-Frank et la femme que j'admire et qui est un exemple pour moi, qui est l'héros de la France, Simone Weil. C'est à Bergen-Belsen il fallait que je meure. C'est là que les nazis souhaitent et essaient de me tuer. Les images des milliers de cadavres me suivent encore aujourd'hui, comme l'odeur de ces milliers de cadavres en train de pourrir en plein air. Tout ça me hante. La mort de mon père, à côté de moi, sous la même couverture, le 4 février 1945, était l'événement le plus traumatique de ma vie. Son mort et les cadavres me suivent encore dans mes rêves et mes cauchemars. Mais grâce à un traitement d'un éminent psychiatre aux Pays-Bas, pendant 10 ans, j'ai trouvé la force et le courage de vivre avec mes traumatismes. Et à une personne que je veux remercier, j'espère qu'il est là, mais ses élèves peut-être, c'est le professeur Steve Kaiser, professeur à l'Athénée. Et Steve Kaiser était l'homme qui m'a montré le chemin de raconter mon histoire maintenant depuis 17 ans. La deuxième personne que je veux remercier en public, c'est mon épouse. L'année prochaine, nous sommes mariés 50 ans et c'est grâce à elle que je fais mes témoignages presque chaque semaine. À la Libération, j'avais 13 ans. Je retrouvais ma mère et frère cadette et ensemble, nous sommes retournés aux Pays-Bas où nous avons créé notre vie. Nous étions aux Pays-Bas parce qu'en 1936, on a dû fuir l'Allemagne, où mon père était président du tribunal à Düsseldorf, et nous avons trouvé l'asile aux Pays-Bas. Nous avons bien sûr perdu la nationalité allemande et le reste suit après. Aux Pays-Bas, je fais mon bac et mes études en agriculture. J'ai vécu en Israël, aux États-Unis, Amérique du Sud, Amérique centrale, Afrique du Sud et Luxembourg. J'ai donné le témoignage à plus de 17 000 élèves et étudiants en France, en Allemagne, aux Pays-Bas et même de temps en temps à Luxembourg. Et j'espère de continuer de faire encore beaucoup plus que possible jusqu'à la fin de mes jours. I'm addressing all of your students from different lycées here today because the world has learned very little about and from the 6 million Jews, the millions of homosexuals, priests, Jehovah's Witnesses, resistance fighters, Muslims, Freemasons, mentally and physically handicapped people, Sintis and Roms, all massacred by the Nazis. And this hate exists now again, 74 years after the death of Hitler. And I hope you, the youth of today, who will become the future managers, leaders, and politicians, will have more positive views about the future we are going to live in than we have today. To the people in power today, who many, I'm sure, have always good intentions, I have 3 questions about what the Nazis did. First, did it all really happen? Did Auschwitz and other camps really happen? 2, what really happened? And 3, can it happen again? Because if we look around the world today, and Europe in particular, considering the anti-Semitic sentiments in France, Germany, Sweden, Holland, Belgium, England, Norway, Poland, and Hungary, amongst others, is it not a repetition of what happened between 1933 and 1945? Auschwitz, où les quelques survivants peuvent vous amener là ou dans les autres camps d'extermination et concentration pour révéler les incroyables défis avec leurs témoignages. Pensez avec vos professeurs à ceux qui sont devenus des étoiles au ciel, comme Primo Levi, Anne Frank, Janusz Korczak, Elie Wiesel, Simone Weil et des autres. Pardon. Simone Weil était, après Auschwitz, dans le même camp de concentration que moi. Mais il faut exprimer l'inexprimable pour décrire le voyage dans les wagons de bestiaux vers des autres univers, où des millions sont réduits en cendres dans les chambres à gaz, à part de ceux qui sont morts de maladie, du fait et du soif. Et pire encore, que parmi des milliers d'enfants, il y avait ceux qui sont morts dans le ventre de leur mère. Pour les survivants, il a fallu des décennies pour qu'on les écoute. Et c'est pour cela, j'espère, au nom de toutes les victimes, que vous êtes d'accord, et j'ai votre appui, de participer à la préservation de leur mémoire. L'outil le plus important contre les tendances d'antisémitisme, de racisme, de xénophobie, de la discrimination et l'éducation. Pensez au monde de Nelson Mandela, à l'adresse à la jeunesse, à leurs enseignants et les dirigeants politiques. Nelson Mandela. L'éducation est l'arme la plus puissante pour changer le monde, pour agir contre la haine, contre l'amertume, la xénophobie et le racisme. Et moi j'ajoute aujourd'hui, malheureusement, de nouveau l'antisémitisme. Les éducateurs ont l'arme le plus puissante entre leurs mains pour guider la jeunesse des ténèbres vers la lumière. And finally, with the concept of anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, with the extermination of all Jews by the Nazis, the Shoah, which in Hebrew means catastrophe, and genocide, the total or partial destruction of a group of nationals, ethnic, racial, or religious. The Nazis lost the war, but Hitler's poison is among us again, and is, I do not hope, but is present at the moment. The evil that was done to the Jews, to each Jewish child, women and men, cannot be undone. I hope that with your help, you, the youth of tomorrow, and your understanding, the lives of which will have never happen again. And let me read part of a poem written by Primo Levi. It comes from Si c'est un homme. Vous, qui vivez en toute quiétude, bien au chaud dans vos maisons, vous, qui trouvez le soir en rentrant la table mise et des visages amis, considérez, si c'est un homme, que celui qui peine dans la boue, qui ne connaît pas de repos, qui se bat pour un quignon de pain, qui meurt pour un oui ou pour un non. Considérez, si c'est une femme, que celle qui a perdu son homme et ses cheveux, et jusqu'à la force de se souvenir, les yeux vides, le sein froid, comme une grenouille en hiver. N'oubliez pas que cela fut. N'oubliez pas. Gravez ce mot dans votre cœur. Pensez-y chez vous, dans la rue, en vous couchant, en vous levant. Et répétez tous à vos enfants. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Klestadt.
Thank you. Is this working?
No, it's not working. It's not working.
It's not working. Oh, there it is. There it is. Thank you so much, Mr. Klestadt. I think you can have your seat right there next to your
Dans le
lovely
répertoire, ils disent qu'ils viennent me chercher.
Unfortunately, this account of Mr. Klestadt has to be very, very short because we want to get into a discussion with you. So this is not just a podium speech from here to down there, but we really get to discussing with you, and we want to go a bit further than just this first-person account of what happened some decades ago, but we want to really link that to today, and Mr. Klestadt has already made quite a lot of links to that. I would like you, Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Lehners, to react to that account briefly, and I would like you to really make the link to today's problems and to today's situation. So maybe you just want to have a brief reaction to that. There was a microphone here. There we go.
Okay. Sure. Hello? Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've never spoken to such a big group of young people before in my entire life, so it's a new experience. Look, I don't know what to say. I listen to Mr. Klestadt right now, and a part of me is confused, a part of me wants to cry, quite honestly, and I have a feeling that any words that I can have are so cheap after we heard the experience of somebody who went through the hellhole that Mr. Klestadt described. So I'm speaking with some reluctance. But let me just say what's in my mind. First is that what he told us about right now is not ancient history. It is not some distant past. It's in the lifetime of your grandparents or of my parents. I lived in quiet Ireland, which was neutral in the war. We just, my country wasn't directly involved, but my parents told me stories of that period like it was yesterday. It was so fresh for them. And if you speak to your grandparents, it's so fresh for them. So it's not ancient history, it's our Europe, a relatively short time ago. And we need to process that and figure out what does that say to us about how we behave, how we act in our societies. The second thing is that we've done a fantastic job of rebuilding Europe out of the mess of the Second World War. The fact that so many of you live in comfortable homes, have a decent education, live in stable families, in stable societies, is an amazing achievement. The fact that the stability of our societies, your homes, our streets, is guaranteed by a network of law, human rights-based law, the rule of law, is an achievement which is so there every day, we often forget to acknowledge how important it is. So we can be very proud of what people of Mr. Klestadt's generation and who followed, how they built up a new Europe to say never again. But third, and this is the only other thing I want to say, is for goodness sake, be alert, be vigilant, because that amazing Europe that was constructed in which we now we thrive is really under threat. It's under pressure from all manner of directions. Mr. Klestadt spoke to us about the attempted annihilation of the Jewish population of Europe. It's an astonishing fact that I have to tell you today, watch out, it's coming back. Hatred of Jews is to be found at a level that's really worrying right across Europe. We know that in our agency, because this is what we do. We measure patterns of these things. 90% of the Jews of Europe told us through survey contacts a few months ago that the biggest fear they have in their lives, it's not unemployment, it's not my children's welfare, it's not social welfare, it's anti-Semitism. The biggest fear they have in their lives is the hatred directed to them because they're Jews. Can you imagine that, those of you who are not Jewish? And I'm sure there are some Jewish people here. But if you're not Jewish, can you imagine what that means? That means you live in a family that is afraid and is nervous, afraid of going to the synagogue, afraid of wearing clothes that identify you as Jewish. And that's just the beginning. That's where the horrors of Mr. Klestadt described begin. And so we have to be very vigilant. It's not just Jews. What Jews went through on our continent stands apart. But they're not the only group under pressure today. Again, because of what my agency does, we're following this. I'll mention, and indeed Mr. Klestadt named all the groups. But let me just mention one, and that is Roma. I don't know if we have any Roma people with us today, but the 6 million people of Roma who identify as Roma inside the EU are treated with the last acceptable form of racism we find in our societies. And think about it yourself. Let's be very honest. Think of the things that have been said about Roma in your home or among your friends at some point in the last few years. It's been the same experience for all of us. It's somehow okay to be racist against people if they're Roma. And again, think, what does that do for their life experience, but also for the health of our societies? Now, I could give you many other examples. Mr. Klestadt gave a long list, and I'd agree with every single group there. Let me just wrap up my own opening comments by suggesting what we need to do. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to speak to every one of you as an individual. not as a group, not young people, but you, and me. The first thing we have to do is ask ourselves how we need to change. Because every one of us who is honest, when we're really challenged, have to admit that there's bits of racism, bits of prejudice deep inside us all. And that's okay. We inherited it. We got it from the surroundings. But it's what we do with it that matters. How we name it, label it, and make sure that it doesn't trigger acts in our lives. And so every one of us has to keep looking to see, where am I really racist, where am I prejudiced, and what am I going to do about it? And the second thing, and this is the only other thing I'd say, is, and this time I'm speaking to you as young people, you're not just the future, you're hope for the present. Everywhere I go in Europe speaking with young people, I hear a different kind of voice, a different kind of energy, a different set of values. But I don't hear it loud enough, and I don't hear it enough in the right places. Everybody's listening to you right now on climate change. You're being listened to. You're getting your message through. You are changing the practices of your families and ultimately of our societies. Do that for tolerance, respect, and non-discrimination as well. It's the whole future of this Europe that we've constructed, about which we can be so proud, depends on that. Mr. Klestadt named many heroes: Nelson Mandela, Simone Weil, and others. They are heroes of the past. What I want is for you to be the heroes of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty. Before we continue with Mr. Lehners, I would just like to would like you to keep in mind this idea of how every single one of us has got these moments of discrimination, of racism in us. Because we are going to come back on that after in the discussion afterwards, because it's something that I would really like to discuss with you, because it's the awareness of that, I think, that you mentioned as well. That's really important. That's really where we can start, each single one of us, with ourselves, to be aware of it. It's about the awareness of that discrimination that we do carry, where we can change things. So, Mr. Lehners.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gerd, for your testimony. And I think it's so important that we can listen to people like you, and that you are ready to continue to speak, as you said, at the end of your life, to speak against racism, against all forms of racism, against all forms of discriminations. And as Michael said, you gave us a list of all these discriminations. That's very important. I'm very proud that here in Luxembourg you can speak freely, because we in ECRI, in one of our country reports, it was in Sweden, public testimonials from Holocaust survivors have been disrupted. So this perhaps is an example of showing you that what we are speaking today about anti-Semitism, about World War II, is really a problem of our time. And you showed us that when we speak about these topics, and in general about rights or about values, we have always two concepts come in my mind. Knowledge on the other side, you asked about knowledge, and emotion, both. I think both are important. And I'm now a teacher for 45 years. So I was, in the first part of my life, I was a secondary school teacher here in Lycée Michel Rodange. It's not far from here. And it was always important for me, as I'm a historian, nobody is perfect, but if I cannot make a link between the topics I was dealing with and your personal life, so I can stop teaching. I must create a link with your life, with your experiences, with your actions, with your demonstrations, and then we can do something. Values. values and rights. I see here the slogan, you and me. Unfortunately, when we discuss about Europe today, it's us and them, and not you and me. It's us and them. And that is a big problem, and I think the European elections in May are of extremely importance to discuss again about values. I have the feeling that in the last months, the discourse on values has replaced the discourse on rights. I'm not so happy with this, and I'm not so happy because in all the political speeches, even in the verbal transgressions by politicians, and that is one of the biggest dangers that we have, the verbal transgressions of politicians that inspired other people to other verbal transgressions. So values, please, when you use the word, say exactly what you mean. Because when I was in France for a report, I asked people of the ministries, what are the values? Because they always said, les valeurs de la République. And I asked, what are these values? And you can imagine the answer. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. When you go to countries in Eastern Europe, you can hear three other concepts: family, religion, nation. Also values. But we have to continue to think about the meaning of these words. And perhaps we can come back to this, and also to the importance of education.
Okay. Thank you very much for those opening statements. I think there's already quite a lot of topics, and certainly more topics that we can handle in the hour that's left for us. I would like just to maybe start with a couple of things. I think what you said, Mr. O'Flaherty, and what has been clearly stated in Mr. Klestadt's témoignage is the question of otherness. Otherness is something that's totally fine, and that can be something positive if we let people convince us that otherness is something bad. Then we're lost. There was a campaign years ago by the European Commission called All Equal, All Different, that I think resumed, and that's really what you quoted as well, Mr. Klestadt, which I think was a very, very important campaign. And this year and last year, there was another campaign about hate speech called No Hate Speech. And that's really where I would like to piggyback with you on this, is that, of course, accounts like Mr. Klestadt's are is describing one of the most extreme, obvious and horrid acts of discrimination, xenophobia and open hatred of modern history. But history, I say history, and that question has been raised as well. Is it history? Is it a closed piece of history, or is this still going on? We should never forget, and that's why those accounts are so important, that this is something that the world hasn't learned from, or hasn't learned from enough, because it is happening again. So I would like to open the discussion to the floor and ask from you where you have had the experience or experienced, either on yourself or assisted or experienced on to someone else, acts of discrimination, and really all kinds of discrimination. This can not be reduced to any kind of group. And I think what you mentioned as well is the question of globalization, of a world that's more diverse, that of course more different minorities can be discriminated against. So what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on otherness? And where, as we've said before, have you caught yourself in maybe having thoughts that could be discriminating or that could be harmful to somebody else that you didn't even mean to be harmful in the first place? I'll just come down. I think that will make it easier. Let's talk a bit about hate speech. Can we try and define that a tiny bit? Who wants to... What is hate speech? Do I see a finger? Like, do I see a hand up there? Do you have an idea what it is? Whom can it go against? You can answer these questions or ask a question or make a comment in any language you'd like to. Oh, there's a question just here. And a remark. Yes. Okay, and if somebody does not want to be on camera, does not want to be filmed, please state so before you do speak. Thank you. Please.
So it's okay for me, you can film me as you want. So, yeah. So you want me to define hate speech. So hate speech is, first of all, if you go against a group, a minority or majority, but if you incite, incitation à la haine, it's called in French, that means is if you incite other peoples, you trigger them to go against another group, ethnicity, or a group of people, and that might be defined as hate speech. And then if you write it, because speech is like talking and writing, that means if you have it on any kind of media, so it's like, and it goes, of course, by hate. That means that you raise some aspects about these groups that might be insulting or negative to them. So that's my point. I give the floor back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Could I have the microphone? Could I have the microphone down here, because I think Mr. Klestadt wants to react to that, and that's really what we. No, you don't. You don't. Why not in French? Because I was told the conference was supposed to be in English.
No.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not running the show.
Okay, so you mentioned written hate speech as well. You mentioned the internet. Obviously, that's something that I think is easily or can easily be used because there is we're anonymous on the internet. Go on, yeah.
No, I think, yeah, it's part of it, but it's not reduced to that. You can also write in a newspaper or maybe diffuse it on posters and everything that is in the public space.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there are unfortunately no limits to what we are discussing. Do you have any examples of that? Do you have any experiences of that? Do we have any? Oh, there's a question or a hand up there.
So during the campaign for the municipal last year, there was written on, no, it was the legislative, it was written on a poster for Mr. Battle, Jude. So that's typically hate speech.
Yes, I think that's a very, very concrete and specific example of that. And it was, I think the reactions again to that were pretty scary. There were, of course, a lot of people defending that, and that I thought was a very scary thing to have happened. And I think it's one of many examples where we really need to be careful where we're going. I would like to come back to what Mr. Klestadt, what you said is that it's not over. This happened, we're in a situation right now where this can easily happen again. Because what we need to be careful about is the Nazi system. It did not start with the concentration camps. It started in 1933, it started a lot earlier, and there was a whole build-up to that. It started with hate speech. So if any of you want to react to that or join the conversation, so we can really have a dialogue back and forth, that would be great. Could we, otherwise, yeah?
Yes, I just want to react to what I heard there. Look, this isn't the 1930s. It's not that simple. And nobody should have a sense that we're hurtling down to the abyss, that it's all about to explode like in 1939. It's different. In some ways, it's way better today because we've got systems and structures to protect us, which do kick in, which do show their teeth. But it's also different in worrying ways, because in the 1930s, you did not have social media. So the ability to spread lies, to spread hate through social media today is exponentially more powerful than it was then. So we have something we don't even know the impact of. So we've got to be really careful. And there's one thing I forgot to say earlier, and for me it's so important that I want to grab the opportunity. As well as waking up to this and being active on this stuff in your lives, have gendered eyes for this. Because women's experience of hatred and discrimination today is typically worse than that of men. And those of us who are men here have to be alert to that, working with women to capture also that quality. If you're a Muslim woman, you have a harder time in Europe than if you're a Muslim man. If you're a Roma woman, it's tougher than if you're a Roma man. And I could say that across many different categories. So always put on gendered spectacles as you look at issues like this.
I think it's good to start with hate speech and also to think about reactions against hate speech. What are the different possibilities we have? We will probably come back to this. But my question is, and it's difficult for me to have an answer, what are the origins of hate? When I go to a primary school, when I go to a kindergarten, how is it possible that you can have hate from one child to the other child? Where does this come from? Is it perhaps the French notion of bouc émissaire? Do we need someone we make responsible for things that happen that we don't like? Is this perhaps the deep meaning of these origins of hate? And how can hate be possible when we think that we all have an inherent dignity? We did not decide the name of our parents. We did not decide the place where we are born. We did not decide the moment when we are born. We are here. We are here on earth. We come from the dust of stars, and we will go back to the dust of stars. And in between, we try to do our best. And when you try to think about the notion of dignity, we share all the same dignity. How is it possible, when you have this in mind, that you can hate someone?
You can leave the microphone there. Yes. Could we have the microphone down here, please?
I've been listening to all the remarks made. Nobody's talking. We can't. No, we have to talk about education, but we're all adults who seem to have been well educated in the sense of going to universities and good schools and so on. But what about education at home? The hate of these kids comes from home. It does not come from the school. And I think that we have to think of educating parents before we think of educating children. And we cannot put all the blame on the schools.
Thank you.
And on people like you.
I think there's a question there also of a responsibility, because it's easy to then put the responsibility only onto the educational system, and that's what's happening a lot, rather than say, well, this might be a shared responsibility, and the shared responsibility is, of course, the transmission of history, but as well as the education at home, as well as the education within an educational system. I do think we have a intervention here.
Just a comment. So I don't know much about the education system as it was before and everything, but I do know from what I've studied and from what I've seen is that apathy breeds apathy. So it's not just parents, it's not just the education system, but it's apathy. Oh, sorry. Yeah. What I've learned from research that I've done and from what I've seen is that apathy breeds apathy. So it's not just parents, it's not just education, it's the leaders that we see, it's the people that we see around us every day. Because if people refuse to stand up or if they're scared to challenge the status quo, then that's not going to change anything. So we need to change apathy to empathy. We need to change that into courage, into bravery for people to actually make a difference. And that's not just in the books and in the education system. It's, like you said, it's how we raise our children, it's how we raise the people around us. And I think that's just something to consider.
I think there's something else that I'd like to add. I think you as young people, I don't know how many of you have civil courage. Are you prepared to stand up on a train and stop somebody from insulting somebody else? That's something you learn as well from your parents and also maybe from school. And I think it's very, very important not to have fear. Why be frightened? Stand up and tell people, I don't like what you're doing.
Are there any reactions to that? Because I think it's a very important point being made there, the question of civil courage. Have you experienced a situation where later you would have said, oh, I should really have intervened, or I have intervened? Please.
Well, I have a small question. We talked about courage, so I want to address my question to you on the stage, because I understood that you all work for the European Union, some way or another. So where's the courage of the European Union to stop the good relations and trade relations with China and Saudi Arabia, for example? I think we should start at a higher stage than at the bottom.
Okay. I think you have a very valid question there, but this is not European. It's not the European Union. So it's Ms. O'Flaherty. Maybe you want to just kind of briefly explain. I think we do need to explain what your agency does and how it's linked and what its political powers are and aren't.
I could do that, but I could also say he's right. In other words, the European Union, like the United Nations, like any other international organization, is not perfect. It's not perfect. It's a political project which involves compromise and sometimes outcomes which leave some of us quite unhappy. That's life. My bit of the union is there to point out the problems without decision-making power. So we give the critique, we provide the analysis, we show the evidence, and then we seek to persuade. So that's why I can go to sleep at night. But since I have the microphone here, I just want to say something to the earlier remarks. Yeah, sure, it's not about schools primarily, learning how to be brave and how to be honourable and how to be decent. It is mainly about the home. But I think it's really okay to talk to all of you about that, because you go home and you teach your parents. You call out prejudice at the dinner table. You call out something that one of your brothers or sisters says that you know is unacceptable, and you are educating your home. So it's not about the parents educating you, it's about the whole community in the home supporting and encouraging each other. And then there were loads of emotions mentioned, great ones, like courage. But the other one I want to mention is anger, because I think that there's nothing more powerful than righteous anger. It doesn't mean you go out there and you smash everything up, but that you just say, this is not acceptable, and I'm not going to lie down and let it happen. That kind of anger really triggers energy to make social changes. And so that's just one more to add to the list. But I hope some people here either already are, or because of today, will get angry, and out of that, do something.
Yeah, you asked about courage of our generation. What are we doing? That's a good question. because you can start with another question. What are you doing? Because I have to explain. We are in the Commission Against Racism and Intolerance in Strasbourg. We try in our national reports, in our country reports, we try to identify the most important discriminations and to find answers to them. We publish everything. Everything is transparent. You can find all our findings on our website, ECRI. And we can make recommendations. These recommendations are not legally binding. That is a big problem for us. We can only try to convince. But what I said about courage of yourself, coming here, I thought, what have been my first activities on these topics? I think the first one was in August '68, when the Soviet troops went to Prague. The day after, I organized with colleagues a demonstration in the city of Luxembourg. We needed one day to organize a demonstration without social media. And I continue to be proud of this. When we had a second and last example, for the protest against Vietnam War was easier because I was not in Luxembourg, I was in Vienna. In Luxembourg, my parents always told me, please, do not organize demonstrations against the United States because they have saved us at the end of the Second World War. So it was easier for me to do it in Vienna. But then, with the nuclear weapons, I was one of the organizers of a peace movement in Luxembourg. And I can tell you, this was not easy. We had many enemies, but we continued. And I'm very proud that this movement is continuing until now. And it becomes even more important that you can do many things. Courage is important. You cannot do something alone. You have to be together with others. And you are showing us examples. Stand up, yes, you are doing it next Friday. And I think this is one step on one topic. There are other steps on other topics.
Thank you. The question of anger, I felt quite a lot of anger or frustration there against that big UFO that is the European Union, and I think everybody, and I think that's something that you certainly completely understand, because those guys, I think, are absolutely trying to lobby for exactly the same. Into the same direction, and your frustration as well. There is frustration on your side as well, and I think it's very, very important what you said is that anger, to put this anger into something positive, to put that into action, to do something about it, and not let that anger go into an anti-European Union feeling, but to actually say, guys, hello, listen to us, and like what is happening next Friday. To say, no, we are here as well, and we do ask for certain things to change, because that's helping the lobby that's happening on a maybe more organized level, on a than more disorganized level, but on a more popular level and a younger level, which is important because those guys need your help as well, and the other way around. There was mentioned before of values and rights. Do we have a hand there? Oh, okay, sorry.
So we have talked about civil courage and acknowledging racism, but do you really think that people will change their behavior? People are not taught to act against such acts. They just look at the assembly. Half of the people are on their phones. That already says a lot about what people think. So if we do not teach people to stand up and act against that, how are we even supposed to think about a solution? Because I think it's nice to say, well, okay, we have to act, we have to say this, we have to do that, but if people are not, if we do not teach people to do so, how is the situation supposed to change?
Are you, thank you. Are you specifically asking for tools?
I mean, tools is a general word. I think it's a question of environment in general. What people tell us, what people say around us, what teachers say, what parents say, what in general we hear on the social media. I think it's a question of, rather than tools, it's more of discourse. People have to learn what it means to stand up. And I think that today people do not know what it means. People do not understand what it is.
Okay, please.
Look, I think that's a really good point. And one thing that I hear from young people all around Europe is that even if you know what you want, you're not given the spaces to say it. You know, you're not given the spaces to have the discussion with people who make the decisions in our society. We have to create more spaces where young people's voices will be heard. It's not just waiting until you turn 17 or 18 and can vote. It's got to be before then, so that your voice is built into the conversation. So I entirely get your point. And by the way, it's not all about knowledge and learning either. It's also about getting to know people. It's about making friends with, listening to, talking to people who are subject to discrimination. Listen to their experience and ask them what you can do or how you can work with them to make a better future. So we may not have all the answers, but what we're inviting you to do is go out there and find the answers with us and with the affected people in our communities.
Can I just briefly piggyback on that? We had a brief discussion beforehand that went along the lines of, well, we don't all need to agree. We don't all need to have the same opinion on one point. And I think that culture of discussion and the culture of debate and a culture of arguing is maybe a start. Do you guys feel like you have, again, you are given the space of being able to express your opinions enough to be in a discussion with others, to express different opinions, to argue? And we don't, like you said before, we don't all need to be nice to each other all the time, and things can get ugly, but this can happen within the context, or must happen within the context of dignity and respect, of course. But I think a good fight, in the sense of debate, is certainly something very, very destructive. Constructive, sorry. Is there anything you want to... Well, Mr. Lehners, please.
Yeah, I think it's important to listen. I totally agree with what Michael said. And you asked about tools. During the No Hate Speech campaign, there have been many discussions about tools. And one tool is when you discover hate speech on internet, on the so-called social media. I say so-called social. If you identify hate speech, you have one possibility, that is counter-speech, counter-discourse, as soon as possible. Do not wait 1 week. Make it directly. And when I said this to young people several weeks ago, they said, okay, counter-speech is important, but it's negative. Wouldn't it be better to enter into a dialogue with these people who spread hate speech everywhere? But how can we organize a dialogue, a non-violent dialogue, starting dialogue with people who spread hate speech? So not only counter speech is important, but it's also important is to enter into dialogue and to find the deep origins of this hate, and then perhaps we can find better solutions.
Can I just add a sentence? I'd like to add a sentence, just one sentence. I'm not too worried about half the room being on their phones, because I'm hoping that on your phone you're sending really good messages up to social media about the conversation we're having here this afternoon.
Are there any immediate reactions to that? Yes.
I think that the idea of dialogue is really good, but the thing is we've already tried to have dialogues with such people. And I think these people do not want to have dialogue with us. These people, they don't listen to us. It's like fighting with windmills. You want to talk with someone that has ideas that are so limited that they do not even want to take into consideration what you've just said. So in a society where you think that your opinion is useless, why would you think that talking to these people would be something constructive?
Let me, look, I appreciate this guy for speaking a second time, but my friend, I don't agree with you. Look, you keep talking about these people, but who are these people? These people are everybody in this room. And I'm not going to ask them to self-identify, but there are Muslims in this room. There are Jews in this room. There are members of different ethnic minorities in this room. There are gay people in this room. They're the people you're referring to as these people. They're us. It's just about having conversations in our society, across our diversity, so we understand each other better and we work together to make for a more fair society that we can be proud of. So they're not some distant people outside our streets, outside our societies. They're all of us.
Interestingly, what happened now is, of course, then you're falling into the principle of stereotyping with the these people, with the generalization. So I think what we really, really need to be careful about is generalizations. And as we said at the very top of the conference, we did say there are those users of stereotypes, of latent racism, of discrimination, that we don't mean to be such in each and every one of us. And I think the moment we realize those and pinpoint them out, then we can change something, at least about ourselves. And then we can go and demand it. Only then we can go and demand it from others. I think I saw a couple of hands over there.
I was just wondering, especially on social media, when we're discussing or counter-speaking or whatever, to what extent that is constructive. Because, especially on social media, it's such a large platform, and to what extent are you just inciting more hate?
Yeah, I think the grey area I think the grey area actually is a very, very difficult. I think it's a very difficult situation to be to where does the counter speech not become hate speech again? And I think that's really the moment where we need to find the right balance. Is there something you would like to kind of say about that?
Again, I think the speaker puts her finger on something very important. The digital world is beyond our comprehension, and we haven't caught up with it in terms of how to police it, how to take down unacceptable speech, not unpleasant speech. There's nothing wrong with unpleasant speech, but speech that crosses a certain line of hatred, which international law says has to be removed. We're not there yet in terms of how we put on those controls. I'm also very worried because of the extent to which we've not yet come to grips with artificial intelligence. Very commonly, the reason you see a really nasty piece of racist rubbish on social media is because it was multiplied and projected out across the web by artificial intelligence, by an algorithm. And we're only beginning to get our heads around how we police the algorithms and how we limit the use of artificial intelligence. So I don't have any answers. I just want to thank the lady who spoke, because she touched on a really current issue where we're all grappling with.
And from that, I would like just to maybe open a discussion on the question of another seeming grey zone, which is the question of the human rights. Is the free speech on the one hand, but then the respect of the other, the rest of the human rights on the other hand. So how far can free speech go until it starts treading on the feet of somebody else. And I think that's really the grey zone that we're in right now, and that's of course also the arguments that are being used by, well, both sides. I would think so. Say, well, you know, but I have the right to say whatever I want. Do I really have the right to say whatever I want? So
I think talking about respect and acceptance is really nice.
Could you speak up a tiny bit?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think talking about respect and acceptance is something that is quite idealistic, because here in Luxembourg, I think we all have the right to speak up, and, well, personally, I feel quite reassured, and I think I can say whatever I want. But if you look at in some other countries, I mean, for example, in Poland, I'm half Polish. So when I'm in Poland, I don't feel well if I want to talk about religion or anything else, because people are very religious there, or for any other reasons. So I think it is impossible that everybody will be respectful, and I think it's idealistic to think that it's an achievement that we can get.
Is it therefore not worth being idealistic?
No, I don't think it's not worth. But I think we should all try to be respectful. But I think we should also have in mind that it is impossible that everybody will be respectful, and that there will always be people that will disrespect us. Sorry.
I think we have one down here and then up there. Oh, and up. Okay, let's start.
So I wanted to speak about free speech a bit in the context of hate speech, because I think hate speech is in one hand a weapon, but also a shield, because you can use your words however you want, because if you want to attack someone, it's easy, you just shout something at them or whatever. But if you don't defend yourself, whatever you do is useless. So using your words as a shield is maybe the most important thing people have to learn nowadays, that their opinion can be just spread just around the internet at amazing speeds, never reached before by speech. So I think using your words as a shield on the internet, but also just publicly, may be the most important skill that people haven't realized they have. So I think maybe today we have to think about both the offensive and the defensive side of free speech, and not just the offensive part of it.
Thank you. So we are back with the question of tools, because of course speech is a tool, and it can be used negatively as it can be used positively. Thank you for that. Oh yeah, sorry. Do we have a microphone down here, please?
So I think it's a really interesting conversation, and it's definitely very topical, but what I know is that when I have heard or witnessed people use slurs and use hate speech and then use the defense of freedom of speech, people can often retaliate or defend themselves, but oftentimes the people that it's addressed to don't have the voice to do that. Oftentimes the people who are using the hate speech have taken away that voice. They've taken away the opportunity for them to defend themselves. So in that case, yes, it might be considered still freedom of speech, but if the other person doesn't have the same freedom of speech, how are they supposed to exact, or how are they supposed to then utilize that if they're not given the opportunity? So I think that we don't just have to talk about the fine line between hate speech and freedom of speech, but we have to also discuss whether or not both parties involved have that same freedom, because oftentimes they don't.
I couldn't agree more. It's not my words against your words, and that's all it's about. I mean, the gentleman made a good point, but it can't just be about you insult me, I'll insult you back, or I'll defend you back. The most vulnerable victims of hatred, online as well as offline, are the people less positioned, less empowered to answer back, whether it be because of education or language or access to the same social media or many other things. And that's why, again, I'd implore people here when they go away today, whatever they go away with, to be committed not only to standing up for their own human rights and for decency, but also for helping, protecting those around them who they see getting the rough end of it all. They can't be left on their own to defend themselves.
I think that the gentleman over there didn't mean to say that's not what he meant to say, and I think the discussion is really, really interesting in the context of the rest of the human rights, because there's not only free speech, there's a whole list, and they all have to be balanced out for the whole system to work. I think that's really what you're trying to get at, and so that's something that we need to be working on. And I would really like to incite in you to look back into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because it is a tool that you can use to counter hate speech. It's a tool that you can use to help somebody who's not in a position, because some of his human rights are not being respected, to help them to find strength and to help them speak up. So I think because those need to be balanced out, and that's really a tool that we have. It's a non-violent tool that we have that has a certain amount of power, of course a limited power, but if we don't use it, then it is powerless. We do have another remark over there.
Thank you. I wanted to say something about freedom of speech. I think that the right to freedom of speech is the most important right a human can have. And I think that freedom of speech should have no limits, even if you want to insult other people or spread hate or other things, because when we start to limit one human right, we don't have a limit to limit the other human rights. Who can take the right to decide to limit a human right? It's a basic right, and no one should limit it. If you start to limit one thing, there's nothing to not limit other things.
Yeah. So I think, but that's where it becomes complicated. I think that's where it becomes complicated. Exactly.
Let me jump in there. Look, we've got a great rule book for all of this, because when we talk about human rights, we're talking about what's set out in treaties. Well, first you've got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but then you've got the European Convention on Human Rights, you've got the United Nations treaties, the EU has its own human rights treaty, and they, for sure, nearly all the rights are limited. They're subject to limits in there, because we're humans living with each other. If I demand my absolute rights, that's at the expense of you and your absolute rights, and we end up in an eternal fight with each other. So the rights have to be limited out of respect for each other. And freedom of speech, free speech, is just such a right. Look, instead of giving you a law theory, I worked for the United Nations in the 1990s. And I remember in the 1990s, in the UN, we became aware of a radio station called Radio Mille Collines, radio station in Rwanda. And on that radio station in Rwanda, the speaker was saying, "Get the cockroaches, kill the cockroaches." And everybody knew that was go and kill the other ethnic group. The radio was inciting genocide. That kind of speech is not acceptable. That speech has to be taken down. But the treaties that all of our countries have signed up to have laid out a clear rule book on when the speech crosses the line and to the contrary, when the speech has to be tolerated. So just think about it. Think about what you said. If we really applied absolute free speech in the way you described it, look at the chaos we'd have in the world. We don't want another Rwanda.
Yes, but there are other human rights who guarantee that when I'm exerting my freedom of speech, I can't hurt other people. So I can exert my freedom of speech to try and say I want to kill somebody, but the other human rights guarantee that I can't hurt them. And if we try to limit my right to freedom of speech...
Listen, that's fine in theory. That's fine in theory. But in practice, the strongest person is the one who's going to win. And not the smartest lawyer, it'll be the strongest person. The person who can shout loudest is the one who's going to have their freedom of speech protected because they've got the loudest voice. That's not a way to run a society. That's a path to chaos, I think.
But who is the one who can decide what is a part of freedom of speech?
That was my point. We don't have to decide this. We don't have to create this from nothing. We have all of those treaties, which are pretty clear and give us a really good roadmap. And we don't actually have much of a choice. Our governments have committed us to all of these treaties. And let's just trust in them, invest in them, be they of the EU, the Council of Europe, the United Nations. So it's not just I think, you think. There is a rule book that's been laid out.
I think we have maybe a last response from the lady down here, and I think then we slowly start wrapping up.
So I agreed with you for the most part, but when you were talking about having faith in our governments is when I sort of lost you for a bit, because a lot of us don't have a say in what our governments do, because at this point we're too young to do anything that they will recognize, which means that we can't have faith in them when they make decisions for us that we don't agree with. How can we stand with them when they make decisions for us that we don't have any say in, that will affect us negatively because they're too narcissistic or selfish to think about us, the future, when they're just thinking about their own future, which will last a lot less longer than ours. So while I do think that we should have something we should have a line where we draw, freedom of speech versus hate speech and everything, but it's difficult to decide on who decides that, because we can't always trust the people who decide that for us, because in the past when they have, it's put minorities at risk or it's silenced them completely, so we can't always trust the government.
Okay, but you're not as powerless as you think. Okay, most people here don't have the vote yet, I get that. But that doesn't stop you being in politics. That doesn't stop you being politically active. The European Parliament elections are coming up very soon. Have a voice, say what you want, demand minimum standards from the candidates, hold them to account. You may not be able to vote this time round, most of you, but that doesn't stop you getting in there right into the middle of the debates and helping shape them. Because we get the governments we deserve as societies. And so as societies, we have to maybe do a better job of shouting out and holding them to account.
Okay, I think we have a very... Is that a reaction to what's just being said? Laurie? No? Up there? No? No, okay. Okay, could I then... Oh, one last one there.
Hi, first. I just have a question, because I heard the word vote so many times. So as a black person, I was often victim of racism and discrimination before, and I have defended myself, but I think there's a difference in defense and efficient defense, and I believe that I lack efficient defense, and I'm particularly speaking about political force. As an immigrant, I'm not allowed to vote, so it means that I have to rely on somebody else to vote for me, and I think that is extremely unfair. So I cannot determine my own future, and I cannot make important decisions that would affect also other minorities. So do you have a solution for that?
I think what's clearly coming across is really the limits of the political instances and the political power that are in place. I think it is important, though, to not be discouraged by that, but to keep on fighting. And I think that's exactly the revendications that need to be made, that those things need to change, because the moment we stop asking for changes to happen, then they won't happen. I think those values were put in place. There are values, there are European values that were put in place, that are in place. But if we stop defending them, they will fall apart. And that's a very important... I think we're at a very important stage in history right now where things can change, but where they mustn't. So I need to wrap up here, because I'm being told that you need to get to your buses in 13 minutes. So we have a last closing statement from Mr. Klestadt, and then we just take it briefly back to the stage.
sunlight here. Excuse me, let me just give you this. Each one. Copy of my speech. I'd like to reply to the young man in the red t-shirt or whatever it is who complained about the tool.
The microphone stopped working. Let me...
Just the tools are in your mind and you can use them. I'd like to invite you all to look around you with the tools you have probably received also today. Look at the mobbing in your schools. React to the mobbing. Interfere. Help those people that are being mobbed because of their religion, because of their skin, color of their skin, or for any other reason. But mobbing for some students is the worst experience they have. And all of you should club together when you see there's a mobbing in your school. And the last thing I want to say is, I listened to a couple of you. Don't you have debating societies? Like in my youth, we had debating societies. On a parlé de tous, on a discuté et on est arrivé à une solution. Alors, je vous recommande d'organiser des soirées où on peut discuter. C'est ce que vous avez entendu aujourd'hui. Et laissez-moi terminer. Au revoir, messieurs. Je vais vous, très brièvement, lire un poème d'un prêtre allemand, Martin Niemöller, qui était dans le camp de concentration de Dachau, près de Munich, pendant 7 années. Et il a dit la chose suivante. D'abord, ils sont venus pour les socialistes, mais j'ai rien dit parce que je ne suis pas socialiste. D'abord, et après, ils sont venus pour les membres des syndicats. Et j'ai rien dit parce que je ne suis pas syndicaliste. Alors, ils sont venus pour les juifs. Et j'ai rien dit parce que je ne suis pas juif. Et après ça, ils sont venus pour moi. Il n'y avait personne qui se levait et qui m'a défendu. Et j'ai passé 8 années en Dachau. Merci.
I want to finish with 3 messages. The first one is the following. It's for you. Ask yourself, do you hate someone in your life? If yes, what are the reasons? And if yes, what can you do against this feeling? A second message. When you, in the future, you speak about values, always speak about the specific values, define the values. Otherwise, it's nonsense. When you speak about the violation of rights, always identify a specific right. And the last message is on education. Build, create human rights groups in your schools. You can do it. You are free to do it. Then ask your teachers and your directors that your school has a human rights dimension. There are many possibilities. There are many documents of the Council of Europe. There is no excuse of teachers who say, I don't have materials to speak about human rights. We have Compass, we have Compassito, and so on and so on. So that's what you can do in your schools.
There are when you walk out, there is a desk with a lot of those publications on them. So do take those publications with you if you're interested.
Over the last hour and a half, we've had some really varied discussion and a fair amount of disagreement in the room.
Can you take the microphone a bit closer to you?
We've had a fair amount of disagreement in the room, and that's fine, and I appreciate the people who kind of stood up for their own views. We've also had doubt. We've had uncertainty. We've had a sense we don't have tools. The sheer scale of the problems and how difficult it is because you don't have a strong enough political voice and so on. And I get all of that, and we'd have heard a lot more about it if we'd had more time for more voices. But all I want to say, if there was just one thing I wanted to say to you at the end of today, for goodness sake, remember what Mr. Klestadt said. And just ask yourself personally, individually, what can you do, what can I do to make sure that we don't sleepwalk back into the Europe that Mr. Klestadt spoke about? That's all. You find your own way to do it. But everybody, make a personal commitment. The one thing not to, just don't walk away in some kind of apathy, deciding it's not my problem.
So thank you very much. I think what we've learned from this, certainly, and just to piggyback on that, is that we cannot rely, and we mustn't rely on our politics, that we all need to act individually. So I'll leave you with that because I know you need to get to your buses. Thank you very much. And I hope you take up on the idea of Mr. Klestadt to create those debating societies.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.